From the earliest days of human history, the campfire has always been the place to tell stories. But here in Britain, we have a special relationship with such stories. We call them folklore. I'm Ray Mears, and I've been obsessed with folklore since I was a boy, reading stories about mythical figures like King Arthur and the Green Man. But there's one that's held my attention like no other: Robin Hood. The stories of Robin Hood and his band of merry men, robbing from the rich to give to the poor, battling a corrupt sheriff and despicable king, have captured our imaginations for centuries. But how much of the stories are true? I'm on a mission to trace the roots of the Robin Hood legend.
This is the first mention of Robin Hood in Sherwood.
Wow. To explore its inspirations.
I mean, and we talk about how much did the Norman conquest change England? Well, there's a scar of it 1,000 years later.
Separate fact from folklore.
I think you should avoid looking for facts, looking for anything concrete, because they're going to be very thin on the ground.
And uncover what historical truths may be hidden in this centuries-old story.
Philip Mark was the real-life sheriff of Nottingham, and we think that that is partially who this myth of an evil sheriff is based on.
Wow, so he's specifically
named.
fingered in this document.
Absolutely.
Oh, very good, very good. So join me as I embark on a quest to explore our folklore past. The first reference that we have to Robin Hood as we know him, clad in green, in the forest with a band of merry men, comes from the year 1370. But it's not actually the first reference that we have to a Robin Hood. The first mention of the name Robin Hood appears in a court register in 1226, during the reign of King Henry III. From those first references, the story evolved over the centuries until Robin was joined by a familiar cast of companions. Together, they shaped the legend we know, a noble outlaw driven to the forest by a ruthless king and a crooked sheriff.
Before we get on with the rest of the video, I want to tell you about today's video sponsor. This right here might be humanity's instruction manual. It's called The Ultimate Guide to Rebuilding Civilization, and it's a remarkable piece of work brought to you by Hungry Minds. It's essentially a guide to all of our greatest inventions, from the basics of making fire and farming to the complex mechanics of engines and electricity. This isn't just a book, it's a work of art. It's over 400 pages long, printed on high quality matte paper, and filled with the most incredible handmade illustrations that look like they've been pulled from a master inventor's lost journal. It's easy to see why this has been a bestseller and has raised over $3.2 million on Kickstarter. It's just that good. So for anyone who's interested in how things work and how we built the world around us, it's truly the perfect gift. It gives you a real appreciation of the knowledge that we now take for granted, and the team at Hungry Minds wants to share this with the History Hit community, so they're offering a 10% discount. Just follow the link in the description and use the code on screen now at checkout to claim your discounted copy. Seriously, go and have a look.
So I'm sure you're like me, you probably wonder about Robin Hood, Maid Marian, the Sheriff of Nottingham. What was going on? Is there any truth in the story? That's what I want to try and find out. To help unravel this story, I've come to one of Oxford's literary landmarks, the Lamb and Flag, a favourite haunt of two men who were well versed in the land of myths and legends, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, to meet Professor Laura Ash. What do we know about the origin of the story? Where does he come from? How old is it?
From the 15th century, we have some fragmentary ballads and a bit of a play of Robin Hood. So clearly by that point, it's already a spreading story. There are different versions, there are different episodes, different tales to be told. But already they're talking about someone who's hundreds of years previously. So then the question is, well, when? And when does this legend come from and who's it about? So we have 3 different posited dates for a possible actual Robin Hood. One is the end of the 12th century, so the reign of Richard Lionheart, which is of course what we associate with the modern idea of Robin Hood. Yeah. But other stories are that he lived during the reign of Henry III and just after the Civil War with Simon de Montfort, and another that in the reign of Edward I at the end of the 13th century.
What about Maid Marian? Is she in the early stories?
Ah, so she's later. she's a sort of, I think, 16th century invention. She gets added in, bit of romantic interest.
Oh, that's a shame. But I'm quite interested in Friar Tuck.
So he appears in the 15th century, or rather someone who was a bit of a criminal starts calling himself Friar Tuck in the 15th century, and I think it probably gets sucked in.
Well, that's a bit disappointing. It seems I won't be uncovering a band of merry men after all. So, as I embark on this quest for Robin, what should I look for and what should I avoid?
Well, I think you should avoid looking for facts, looking for anything concrete, because they're going to be very thin on the ground. What you can find is symbols and places that particularly conjure up this legend and what it means for people. So I would definitely go to the forest and see some ancient oaks and talk to foresters and talk to people who know about the maintenance of forests and what that's like. And then you can think about the whole legal, moral side of the legend, which is, you know, the idea of resistance to injustice and demanding justice and proper law. And what that is enshrined in, above all, is Magna Carta, the Great Charter. And this is exactly the time of the legend of Robin Hood, that yes, we will have justice. This is what we demand.
Well, that was really interesting. Clearly there's no point in searching for a genuine Robin Hood. If there ever was such a man, he's passed into the fabled dust of time. So perhaps more importantly is to look at the context of the story, what inspired it, what notes are there, what was its purpose and meaning and inspiration to society. Following Laura's advice, I'm going back into the Greenwood. This is the Knepp estate in the south of England. Once the site of a Norman keep and royal park, it's now at the centre of a beautiful rewilding project, creating an ancient landscape full of wildlife, echoing the Middle Ages. Within the Robin Hood story, there rings echoes of dispossession, of people harking back to a lost fantasy world of Anglo-Saxon England, a world violently torn apart by conquest and bloodshed. In 1066, with the defeat of King Harold at the Battle of Hastings, life in England would change forever, particularly in the countryside, because the Normans saw this land with totally different eyes. To uncover more about this tumultuous time and explore the ways it might have inspired stories like Robin Hood, I'm joining History Hit's resident medieval historian, Matt Lewis. This is a lovely spot without any sort of obvious fencing. It has a really old feel. If we were standing here in early part of the 11th century, what was Britain like?
Britain was a subsistence farming community. The vast majority of people lived in the countryside and they worked the land, they grew their own food. Areas like this were the lifeblood of local communities because you could come here and find all of the resources that you needed to live.
How did they ensure that they didn't overexploit the resources?
It wasn't all that well policed in Anglo-Saxon. You had fairly free access to places like this, and I guess there wasn't much of an incentive to over collect those things, because you needed what you needed for your family to survive.
But it wasn't a free-for-all. There had to be some sort of an administration of how you organise yourself to ensure that you had the resources you need.
Everything in Anglo-Saxon England seems to be done on a really local level. So everything is organised around a small local community. So people are given a piece of land known as a hide, and a hide is considered the amount of land that's required to support one family. And it wasn't a measurable unit in terms of acreage or anything like that. If it was good land, it might be a smaller plot. But if you've got some rough land that's hard to grow crops on, you would end up with a bigger piece of land. It's whatever was enough to support a single family.
Quite a comfortable system in a way.
It feels quite nice, almost. And there is a sense in which people tend to think of Anglo-Saxon England as this kind of utopia where everything was better, everything was great. And that's definitely not the case. You've got 75% of the population are serfs. So they're tied to the piece of land that they work on. They don't own very much. They're required to do work for other people. They can't move wherever they want to. Slavery still exists in Anglo-Saxon England. So life is very definitely hard. Almost everybody is a subsistence farmer. You're living hand to mouth.
Forests were the lifeblood of Anglo-Saxon life. A source of food, fuel, and shelter. But all of this was about to suddenly change. So Matt, the big change, of course, came immediately after the Battle of Hastings. I mean, Saxon Britain becomes Norman Britain.
It does, overnight. It's a huge change. All of the power is now being taken out of the local communities, and it's being piled up at William's court in London. So everything is becoming much more centralised.
And the freedom to roam that the Saxon population had enjoyed would also come to an end.
The Norman kings are famously fond of hunting, so
Yeah.
they love to go riding and hunt deer in the woods. And they begin to enclose huge areas of the countryside as what are known as royal forests or royal parks. Royal forest doesn't necessarily mean it was trees like this, it could be open land. But once it's designated as a royal forest, it's out of bounds to everybody else. The local population that used to go there and collect their wood and maybe hunt for a bit of meat are all of a sudden criminalised for doing the things that they've always done and that their fathers and their grandfathers have always done, and the way that they provide for their family.
The exclusion was really profound. I sort of walked you here on purpose because this is actually part of the old Norman boundary of this deer park. All of that freedom they'd experienced for generations suddenly comes to an end. I mean, that must have created an incredible simmering anger of resentment.
There's great stories of more individual acts of resistance. There's a guy called Herowood who is normally called Hereward the Wake, and he takes up residence on the Isle of Ely. I'm going to age myself now, but it's like watching an episode of the A-Team, reading about this guy who gets himself into all kinds of sticky situations, gets into William's court to spy on them, and is recognised in the kitchens, has to fight his way out, and he's killing Normans and defeating them, outwitting them. He represented all of those people who've been deprived of all of the stuff that they used to take for granted in Anglo-Saxon England that Norman England now makes criminal.
But Herowood was a real person. And of course the danger for a resistance hero who really exists is they can be captured and killed. But what you can't deal with is a mythical figure from folklore. It makes me wonder, could rebel figures like Hereward the Wake have been the original spark for the Robin Hood legend? A native warrior fighting for the dispossessed, standing against authoritarian foreign rule. The impact of the Norman invasion is difficult to understand today, but it was profound. For ordinary people, gone were the days of easy access to the woodland and the countryside. Now, estates like Knepp were closed off to the ordinary population, reserved for the hunting of a privileged elite. If an ordinary man came in here to help himself to some meat, he risked his life to do so. Whilst hunting was now forbidden for the majority, a privileged few were free to pursue it, not out of necessity, but for pleasure. In their service was a retinue of skilled gamekeepers, men who knew the land intimately, just as Robin Hood himself was said to know every path and hiding place in Sherwood Forest. Over 900 years later, the Knepp estate is still overseen by a team of gamekeepers. Paul Beach is one of them. Well, Paul, one of the key jobs for the gamekeeper was finding an animal for the hunter to hunt. That was one of their key jobs. And what they would do is they knew, obviously, as you know your beat, they knew their beat. And they knew which woods that would hold the deer, where they would harbour up and couch during the day. And if they'd found a suitable animal, they would look for its tracks and look for a rack. You know, you use the word rack?
We do, yes.
Yeah, it's an ancient term of venery for a deer trail. And you can see this is a track in regular use, and I can see that we've got fresh disturbance there. So we can see that a deer is moving, and they're looking for very, very delicate spoor.
And very specific by the sound of it as well.
Very specific. And they're looking also for the fumets or crotties, depending on the animal. So here, what animal?
That would be a fallow buck.
Exactly. Brilliant. See, the skills still exist.
It
I love
does.
it. So let's say this was the animal we're after. What the keepers did was they would close off this rack so that they could check in the morning whether or not it had left. If the ground was soft, you could smooth it over. If it was sandy, to look for footprints. But another way, of course, of doing this was very straightforward. Just to take a little bit of bramble and pass that across here.
The ancient equivalent of a trail camera.
Exactly. A fox or a rabbit can pass underneath,
Yep.
but if a deer comes past here, it will disturb it, and then we'll know that something has come out. Today, Paul and I are tracking deer, and just like our medieval forebears, we're looking for the smallest of signs. A footprint, a broken twig, subtle clues that reveal the presence of an animal. What have we got there then?
That's a fallow.
And here we've got a left foot there. And if we can put 3 fingers is the length of the track, or the track is larger, we know it's a mature animal. Okay. And that's a technique from the past. So this will be 2 years or more older. My gut feeling looking at it is it's probably 3. But I'll show you how they measured it. So they'd make what's called a scantillon, which was just a term for a measure back in the day. And they would measure the length of the track in this way here. And now we've got that deer in our pocket. The role of the gamekeeper was not only to track and manage the animals, but also to play a vital role in the rituals and festivities of the hunt. Chief among them, the time-honoured ceremony of the presenting of the fumes. Here, Paul, what do you think about these droppings?
Let's have a look. Very fresh.
I reckon that's our beast for our hunt. What do you think?
So, yes.
Yep. Now, we know from the French book of hunting, the Livre de Chasse, that on the eve of a hunt, they had a picnic, a very grand affair. You can imagine it would have been as bling as possible, minstrels playing, gentlemen and ladies, a bit of dalliance in the wood, beautiful place, you imagine the scene. But at this picnic, which was called the Assemblée, the gamekeepers would at some point be brought to the person who's going to be hunting the following day, and on the picnic table, they would empty out the fumets, the droppings, from their hunting horn that they had collected. So this is the animal each gamekeeper had selected, and they pour them onto the picnic table, and then the hunter would select which animal they would hunt the following day. They'd have options. Then the gamekeeper who supplied those droppings would lead the hunt on the following day. So I suspect that the gamekeepers are watching now to see if the hunter knew as much about the droppings as they did. Did they choose right or not? Which is nice.
Yeah.
But we also know that in the Middle Ages in Britain, it was considered uncouth to drop deer droppings onto a picnic table. You know, I can't imagine somebody dropping deer droppings on the picnic table in front of Princess Anne. Can you imagine? No.
I wouldn't want to try it.
No. So in England, we would instead make a bouquet out of oak leaves. I first carefully begin to bunch and layer the oak leaves on top of each other. Then taking a strip of willow bark, I carefully bind the leaves together into a bouquet. Something along these lines. I haven't done a very good job of that. And now the droppings can be nestled into the little nest that we've created. And now these can be taken to the picnic table without spoiling people's dinner. So what do you think? Would you pick this animal?
Let's have a look. Well, I would say that's a mature fallow doe, very fresh.
Very fresh.
Be a good eater.
Hi there, I'm Dan Snow, and if you love history, you know that History Hit is on a mission to bring the past to life. Every week, we travel the world to film original and in-depth documentaries. And now History Hit has launched a YouTube membership to give you access to even more films released weekly. Become a History Hit channel member now to make sure you never miss out on exclusive documentaries on topics like newly discovered shipwrecks and the clash of gladiators. We cover all time periods and all subjects, from Pompeii to D-Day. Click the join button on the History Hit YouTube channel, or click the link in the description and see for yourself what History Hit has to offer. We can't wait to have you join the team.